All right, we are coming up on. I will learn one of these days to turn the monitor down. Anyway, yeah, we are coming up on 8 o'clock. So, let's settle in, get comfortable, grab ourselves a book and a drink, and let's jump back in to where we left off. Welcome back. This is our fourth night of reading from Genji Monogatari. This has been a series of ups and downs, twists and turns. Not so much in the traditional way you'd think of twists and turns. No, it's going between enjoyment and moral revulsion, shall we say? Genji has a way of flipping modes between the enlightened observer who sits by the side and is, a little dismissive. And then on the other side, he will flip almost immediately, and we're getting into the squicky territory, honestly. And yeah, the new camera works a charm. I'll need to adjust the tracking and model a bit because this one is so much more sensitive. Hello again, Stream Elements. So, with the little bit of earlier synopsis out of the way, we can kind of track down a little bit of Genji's misadventures. There was Utsusemi, who they sort of flirted around each other. They both wanted to make a connection, but never actually did. And then there was Utsusemi's friend, who was relatively easily tripped up. Who he then promptly ignored. And then we move on to Tono Chujo's once lover, wife, person. I can't even keep track of this. Who, after having decided to have some rendezvous while he was in disguise, took her off to run away out of the slums, where she died promptly. Genji, what are you doing, man? And then between this and his spells of just falling ill for unexplained amounts of time, about as sickly as Vic, honestly. So, there's a lot to be had here. And the most recent, while he was off to be on the mend out in the mountains, found, presumably, we think, Tono Chujo's daughter. So his friend's daughter, from the estranged woman that he saw off to the deathbed, and he's got. We can really, really hope they're pure motives. That he wants to look out for a girl who is alone in the world. I'm not getting that vibe, and I'm almost afraid to learn a little bit more. But learn more we will, because we're resuming now from Chapter 5, about halfway through Chapter 5, entitled Murasaki, which I'm reasonably sure is the little girl. On his return to the capital, he went straight to the palace and described to his father the experiences of the last 2 days. The emperor thought him looking very haggard, and was much concerned. He asked many questions about the hermit's magical powers, all to which Genji replied in great detail. He ought certainly to have been made Master Magician long ago, said His Majesty. His ministrations have repeatedly been attended with great success. But, for some reason, his services have escaped public acknowledgement. And he issued a proclamation to this effect. The minister of the left came to meet him on his way from the presence, and apologized for not having come to his sons to bring come with his sons to bring him back from the mountain. I thought, he said, that as you had gone there secretly, you would dislike being fetched. But I very much hope that you will now come and spend a few days with us, quietly. After which I shall esteem it a privilege to escort you to your palace. He did not in the least want to go, but there was no escape. His father-in-law drove him to the great hall in his own carriage, and when the bullocks had been unyoked, dragged it in at the gate with his own hands. Such treatment was certainly meant to be very friendly, but Genji found the minister's attentions merely irritating. Aoi's quarters had, in anticipation of Genji's coming, just been put thoroughly to rights. In the long interval since he last visited her, many changes had been made. Among other improvements, a handsome terrace had been built. Not a thing was out of its right place in this supremely well-ordered house. Aoi, as usual, was nowhere to be seen. It was only after repeated entreaties by her father that she at last consented to appear in her husband's presence. Posed like a princess in a picture, she sat almost motionless. Beautiful she certainly was. I should like to tell you about my visit to the mountain, if only I thought that it would interest you at all, or draw an answer from you. I hate to go on always like this. Why are you so cold and distant and proud? Year after year we failed to reach an understanding, and you cut yourself off from me more completely than before. Can we not manage for a little while to be on ordinary terms? It seems rather strange, considering how ill I have been, that you should not attempt to inquire after my health. Or rather, it is exactly what I should expect. But nevertheless, I find it extremely painful. Yes, said Aoi, it is extremely painful when people do not care what becomes of one. Ooh, damn. She glanced back over her shoulder as she spoke, her face full of scorn and pride, looking uncommonly handsome as she did so. You hardly ever speak, said Genji, and when you do, it is only to say unkind things and twist one's harmless words so that they seem to be insults. And when I try to find some way of helping you, for a while at least, to be a little less disagreeable, you've become more hopelessly unapproachable than ever. Shall I one day succeed in making you understand? And so saying, he went into their bedroom. She did not follow him. He lay for a while in a state of great annoyance and distress, but, probably because he did not really care about her very much one way or the other, he soon became drowsy, and all sorts of quite different matters drifted through his head. He wanted as much as ever to have the little girl in his keeping, and to watch her grow to womanhood. But the grandmother was right. The child was too absurdly young, and it would be very difficult to broach the matter again. Would it not, however, be possible to contrive that she should be brought to the capital? It would be easy then to find excuses for fetching her, and she might, even through some arrangement as that, become a source of constant delight to him. The father, Prince Hyobukyo, was, of course, a man of very distinguished manners, but he was not at all handsome. How was it that the child resembled one of her aunts, and was so unlike all the rest? He had an idea that Fujitsubo and Prince Hyobukyo were children of the same mother, while the others were only half-sisters. The fact that the little girl was closely related to the lady whom he had loved for so long made him all the more set upon securing her. And he had begun, again, to puzzle his head for some means of bringing this about. So, as we were discussing, or mentioning, he's constantly skirting the line between hating and tolerating. He's dancing across that line right now. Not even so much skirting the line, just, taking a quick tentative hop way over to the other side and seeing, I wonder how the weather is over on this side. Genji, my man, come on. Next day, he wrote his letter of thanks to the priest. No doubt it contained some allusion to his project. To the nun, he wrote, "Seeing you so resolutely averse to what I had proposed, I refrained from justifying my intentions so fully as I could have wished. But should it prove that, even by the few words I ventured to speak, I was able to convince you that this is no mere whim or common fancy, how happy would such news make me?" On a slip of paper folded small and tucked into the letter, he wrote the poem, "Though with all my heart I tried to leave it behind me, never for a moment has it left me, the fair face of that mountain flower." Though she had long passed the zenith of her years, the nun could not but be pleased and flattered by the elegance of the note, for it was not only written in an exquisite hand, but was folded with a careless dexterity which she greatly admired. She felt very sorry for him, and would have been glad, had it been in her conscience, to have sent him a more favorable reply. "We were delighted," she wrote, "that being in the neighborhood, you took occasion to pay us a visit. But I fear that when, as I very much hope you will, you come here purposely to visit us, I shall not be able to add anything to what I have said already. As for the poem which you enclose, I do not expect her to answer it, for she cannot yet write her naniwazu properly, even letter by letter. Let me then answer it for her. For as long as the cherry blossoms remain unscattered upon the shore of Onoi, where wild storms blow, so long have you till now been constant. For my part, I am very uneasy about the matter." The priest replied to the same effect. Genji was very much disappointed, and after 2 or 3 days, he sent for Koremitsu and gave him a letter for the nun, telling him at the same time to find out whatever he could from Shonagon, the child's nurse. "What an impressionable character he is," thought Koremitsu. He had only had a glimpse of the child, but that had sufficed to convince him that she was a mere baby, though he remembered thinking her quite pretty. What trick would his master's heart be playing upon him next? The old priest was deeply impressed by the arrival of a letter in the hands of so special and confidential a messenger. After delivering it, Koremitsu sought out the nurse. He repeated all that Genji had told him to say, and added a great deal of general information about his master. Being a man of many words, he talked on and on, continually introducing some new topic which had suddenly occurred to him as relevant. But at the end of it all, Shonagon was just as puzzled as everyone else had been to account for Genji's interest in a child so ridiculously young. His letter was very deferential. In it he said that he longed to see a specimen of her childish writing, done letter by letter, as the nun had described. As before, he enclosed a poem. "Was it the shadows in the mountain well that told you my purpose was but jest?" To which she answered, "Some, perhaps, that have drawn in that well now bitterly repent. Can the shadows tell me if again it will be so?" And Koremitsu brought a spoken message to the same effect, together with the assurance that so soon as the nun's health improved, she intended to visit the capital, and would then communicate with him again. The prospect of her visit was very exciting. About this time, Lady Fujitsubo fell ill and retired for a while from the palace. The sight of the emperor's grief and anxiety moved Genji's pity, but he could not help thinking that this was an opportunity which must not be missed. he spent the whole of that day in a state of great agitation, unable, whether in his own house or at the palace, to think of anything else, or call upon anyone. When, at last, the day was over, he succeeded in persuading her maid, Omyobu, to take a message. The girl, though she regarded any communication between them as most imprudent, seeing a strange look in his face, like that of one who walks in a dream, took pity on him, and went. The princess looked back upon their former relationship as something wicked and horrible, and the memory of it was a continual torment to her. She had determined that such a thing must never happen again. Would you look at that? Someone notices red flags. She met him with a stern and sorrowful countenance, but this did not disguise her charm, and as though conscious that he was unduly admiring her, she began to treat him with great coldness and disdain. He longed to find some blemish in her, to think that he had been mistaken, and be at peace. I need not tell all that happened. The night passed only too quickly. He whispered in her ear the poem, "Now that at last we have met, would that we might vanish forever into the dream we dreamed tonight." But she, still conscience-stricken, "Though I were to hide in the darkness of eternal sleep, yet would my shame run through the world from tongue to tongue." And indeed, as Genji knew, it was not without good cause that she had suddenly fallen into this fit of apprehension and remorse. As he left, Omyobu came running after him with his cloak and other belongings which he had left behind. He lay all day upon his bed in great torment. He sent a letter, but it was returned unopened. This had happened many times in the past, but now it filled him with such consternation that for 2 or 3 days he was completely prostrate and kept his room. All this while he was in constant dread lest his father, full of solicitude, should begin inquiring what new trouble had overtaken him. Fujitsubo, convinced that her ruin was accomplished, fell into a profound melancholy, and her health grew daily worse. Messengers arrived constantly from the court, begging her to return without delay, but she could not bring herself to go. Her disorder had now taken a turn which filled her with secret foreboding, and she did nothing all day long but sit distractedly wondering what would become of her. When the hot weather set in, she ceased to leave her bed at all. 3 months had now passed, and there was no mistaking her condition. Clinical depression? Soon it would be known, and everywhere discussed. She was appalled at the calamity which had overtaken her. Not knowing that there was any cause for secrecy, her people were astonished that she had not long ago informed the emperor of her condition. Speculations were rife, but the question was one which only the princess herself was in a position definitely to solve. Omyobu and her old nurse's daughter, who waited upon her at the toilet and in the bathhouse, had at once noted the change, and were somewhat taken aback. But Omyobu was unwilling to discuss the matter. She had an uncomfortable suspicion that it was the meeting which she arranged that had now taken effect with cruel promptness and precision. It was announced in the palace that other disorders had misled those about her, and prevented them from recognizing the true nature of her condition. This explanation was accepted by everyone. The emperor himself was full of tender concern, and though messengers kept him constantly informed, the gloomiest doubts and fancies passed continually through his mind. Genji was at this time visited by a most terrifying and extraordinary dream. He sent for interpreters, but they could make little of it. There were indeed certain passages to which they could assign no meaning at all. But this much was clear. the dreamer had made a false step, and must be on his guard. "It was not my dream," said Genji, feeling somewhat alarmed. "I am consulting you on behalf of someone else." And he was wondering what this false step could have been when news reached him of the princess's condition. This, then, was the disaster which his dream had portended. At once he wrote her an immense letter full of passionate self-reproaches and exhortations. But Omyobu, thinking that it would only increase her agitation, refused to deliver it. And he could trust no other messenger. Even the few wretched lines with which she had been in the habit of sending to him now and again had, for some while, utterly ceased. In her 7th month, she again appeared at court. Overjoyed at her return, the emperor lavished boundless affection upon her. The added fullness of her figure, the unwonted pallor and thinness of her face gave her, he thought, a new and incomparable charm. As before, all his leisure was spent in her company. During this time, several court festivals took place, and Genji's presence was constantly required. Sometimes he was called upon to play the koto, or flute. Sometimes to serve his father in other ways. On such occasions, strive as he might to show no trace of embarrassment or agitation, he feared more than once that he had betrayed himself, while to her such confrontations were one long torment. The nun had somewhat improved in health, and was now living in the capital. He had inquired where she was lodging, and sent messages from time to time, receiving, which indeed was all he expected, as little encouragement as before. In the last months, his longing for the child had increased rather than diminished, but day after day went by without his finding any means to change the situation. Yeah, there's we've sailed well past Squicky and just into as the autumn drew to its close, he fell into a state of great despondency. One fine moonlit night, when he had decided, against his own inclination, to pay a certain secret visit, a shower came on. And there is a footnote, and I have to know. Secret visit. Okay, no, it's just saying where he's going. We'll leave that to the imagination for now. There are certain turns of phrases of translation that you have to wonder whether they're euphemisms for other terms or not. So, at this point, we'll leave it up to the... Well, I guess we're the reader. We'll leave it up to you to decide. Anyway. One fine moonlit night, when he had decided, against his own inclination, to pay a certain secret visit, a shower came on. As he had started from the palace, and the place to which he was going was in the suburbs of the 6th Ward, it occurred to him that it would be disagreeable to go so far in the rain. He was considering what to do when he noticed a tumbled-down house surrounded by very ancient trees. He asked whose this gloomy and desolate mansion might be, and Koremitsu, who, as usual, was with him, replied, "Why, that is the late Azechi no Dainagon's house. A day or two ago I took occasion to call there, and was told that my lady the nun has grown very weak, and does not now know what goes on about her." "Why did you not tell me this before?" said Genji, deeply concerned. "I should have called at once to convey my sympathy to her household. Pray, go in at once and ask for news." Koremitsu, accordingly, sent one of the lesser attendants to the house, instructing him to give the impression that Genji had come on purpose to inquire. When the man announced that Prince Genji had sent him for news and was himself waiting outside. Great excitement and consternation prevailed in the house. Their mistress, the servant said, had for several days been lying in a very parlous condition, that could not possibly receive a visit, but they dared not simply send so distinguished a visitor away, and, hastily tidying the southern parlor, they bustled him into it, saying, "You must forgive us for showing you into this untidy room. We have done our best to make it presentable. Perhaps on a surprise visit, you will forgive us for conducting you to such an out-of-the-way closet." It was, indeed, not at all the kind of room that he was used to. "I have been meaning for a long while to visit this house," said Genji, "but time after time the proposals which I made in writing concerning a certain project of mine were summarily rejected, and this discouraged me. Had I but known that your mistress's health had taken this turn for the worse." "Tell him that at this moment my mind is clear, though it may soon be darkened again. I am deeply, deeply sensible of the kindness he has shown in thus visiting my deathbed, and regret that I cannot speak with him face to face. Tell him that if by any chance he has not altered his mind with regard to the matter that he has discussed with me before, by all means let him, when the time has come, number her among the ladies of his household. It is with great anxiety that I leave her behind me, and I fear that such a bond with earth may hinder me from reaching the life for which I have prayed." Her room was so near, and the partition so thin, that as she gave Shonagon her message, he could hear her now and again, the sound of her sad, quavering voice. Presently, he heard her saying to someone, "How kind, how very kind of him to come. If only the child were old enough to thank him nicely." "It is indeed no question of kindness," said Genji to Shonagon. "Surely it is evident that only some very deep feeling would have driven me to display so zealous a persistency. Since I first saw this child, a feeling of strange tenderness towards her possessed me, and it has grown to such a love as cannot be of this world only. Though it is but an idle fancy, I have a longing to hear her voice. Could you not send for her before I go?" "Poor little thing," said Shonagon. "She is fast asleep in her room, and knows nothing of all our troubles." But as she spoke, there was a sound of someone moving in the women's quarters, and a voice suddenly was heard saying, "Grandmother, grandmother! Prince Genji, who came to see us in the mountains, is here, paying a visit. Why do you not let him come and talk to you?" "Hush, child, hush!" cried all the gentlewomen, scandalized. "No, no," said the child. "Grandmother said that when she saw this prince, it made her feel better at once. I was not being silly at all." This speech delighted Genji, but the gentlewomen of the household thought the child's incursion painful and unseemly, and pretended not to hear her last remark. Genji gave up the idea of paying a real visit, and drove back to his house, thinking, as he went, that her behavior was indeed still that of a mere infant. Yet how easy and delightful it would be to teach her! Next day, he paid a proper visit. On his arrival, he sent in a poem written on his usual tiny slip of paper. "Since first I heard the voice of the young crane, my boat shows a strange tendency to stick among the reeds." It was meant for the little girl, and was written in a large, childish hand, but very beautifully, so that the ladies of the house said, as soon as they saw it, "This will have to go into the child's copybook." Shonagon sent him the following note. "My mistress, feeling that she might not live through the day, asked us to have her moved to the temple in the hills, and she is already on her way. I shall see to it that she learns of your inquiry, but I can but send word to her before it is too late." The letter touched him deeply. Genji's a regular Grim Reaper going around these parts. Everyone he seems to get remotely close to keels over within a chapter. During these autumn evenings, his heart was in a continual ferment. But though all his thoughts were occupied in a different quarter, yet, owing to the curious relationship in which the child stood to the being who thus obsessed his mind, the desire to make the girl his own throughout this stormy time grew daily stronger. He remembered the evening when he had first seen her and the nun's poem. Not knowing if any will come to nurture the tender leaf, she would always be delightful. But in some respects, she might not fulfill her early promise. One must make risks. And he made the poem, "When shall I see it lying in my hand, the young grass of the moorside that springs from purple roots?" In the 10th month, the emperor was to visit the Suzakuin for the festival of red leaves. The dancers were all to be sons of the noblest houses. The most accomplished among the princes, courtiers, and other great gentlemen had been chosen for their parts by the emperor himself. And from the royal princes and state ministers downward, everyone was busy with continual practices and rehearsals. Genji suddenly realized that for a long while he had not inquired after his friends on the mountain. He at once sent a special messenger who brought back this letter from the priest. "The end came on the 20th day of the last month. It is the common lot of mankind, yet her loss is very grievous to me." This and more he wrote, and Genji, reading the letter, was filled with a bitter sense of life's briefness and futility. And what of the child, concerning whose future the dead woman had shown such anxiety? He could not remember his own mother's death at all distinctly, but some dim recollection still floated in his mind, and gave to his letter of condolence an added warmth of feeling. It was answered, not without a certain self-importance, by the nurse Shonagon. After the funeral and mourning were over, the child was brought back to the capital. Hearing of this, he allowed a short while to elapse, and then one fine, still night went to the house of his own accord. This gloomy, decaying, half-deserted mansion must, he thought, have a most depressing effect upon the child who lived there. He was shown into the same small room as before. Here, Shonagon told him, between her sobs, the whole tale of their bereavement, at which he too found himself strangely moved. "I would send my little mistress to his highness her father's," she continued, "did I not remember how cruelly her poor mother was used in that house. And I would do it still, if my little lady were a child in arms who would not know where she had taken to nor what the people there were feeling towards her. But she is now too big a girl to go along among a lot of strange children, who might not treat her kindly. So her poor dead grandmother was always saying, down to her last day, 'You, sir, have been very good to us, and it would be a great weight off my mind to know that she was coming to you, even if it were only for a little while. I would not worry you with asking what was to become of her afterwards. Only for her sake, I am sorry that she is not some years older, so that you might make a match of it. But the way she has been brought up has made her young even for her age.' You need not so constantly remind me of her childishness," said Genji, "though it is indeed her youth and helplessness which move my compassion. Yet I realize, and why should I hide it from myself or from you, that a far closer bond unites our souls. Let me tell her myself what we have just now decided." And he recited a poem, in which he asked if, like the waves that lap the shore where young reeds grow, he must advance only to recede again. "Will she be too much surprised?" he added. Shonagon, saying that the little girl should by all means be fetched, answered his poem with another, in which she warned him that he must not expect her to drift seaweed-like with the waves. Before she understood his intention, "Now, what made you think I should send you away without letting her see you?" she asked, speaking in an offhand, familiar tone, which he found easy to pardon. His appearance, which the gentlewomen of the house studied with great care while he sat while he sat waiting for the child and singing to himself a verse of the song, Why So Hard to Cross the Hill, made a deep impression upon them. And they did not forget that moment for a long while afterward. The child was lying on her bed, weeping for her grandmother. "A gentleman in a big cloak has come to play with you," said one of the nursewomen, some women who were waiting upon her. "I wonder if it is your father." At this she jumped up and cried out, "Nurse, where's the gentleman in the cloak? Is he my father?" And she came running into the room. "No," said Genji, "it is not your father, but it is someone else, who wants you to be very fond of him. Come." She had learnt from the way people talked about him that Prince Genji was someone very important, and feeling that he must really be very angry with her for speaking of him as the gentleman in a cloak, she went straight to her nurse and whispered, "Please, I'm sleepy." "You must not be shy of me any more," said Genji. "If you are sleepy, come here and lie on my knee. Will you not even come and talk to me?" "There," said Shonagon. "You see what a little savage she is?" and pushed the child towards him. She stood listlessly by his side, passing her hand under her hair so that it fell in waves over her soft dress, or clasping a great bunch of it where it stuck out thick about her shoulders. Presently, he took her hand in his, but at once, in terror of this close contact with someone to whom she was not used, she cried out, "I said I wanted to go to bed!" And snatching her hand away, she ran into the women's quarters. He followed her, saying, "Dear one, do not run away from me. Now that your granny is gone, you must love me instead." "Oh, whoa, okay. Genji, what are you making me read?" "Well," gasped Shonagon, deeply shocked. "No, that is too much. How can you bring yourself to say such a wicked thing to the poor child?" "Yeah, you tell him. You tell him. And it is not so not much use telling people to be fond of one, is it?" "For the moment, it may not be," said Genji, "but you will see that strange things happen if one's heart is set upon a thing as mine is now." Yo, Genji. We are racing to the bottom here. That line, way in the back seat. Ay. Hail was falling. It was a wild and terrible night. The thought of leaving her to pass it in this gloomy and half-deserted mansion immeasurably depressed him, and, snatching at this excuse for remaining near her, "Shut the partition door," he cried. "I will stay for a while, and play the watchman here on this terrible night. Draw near to me, all of you." And so saying, as though it were the most natural thing in the world, he picked up the child in his arms and carried her to her bed. The gentlewomen were far too astonished and confounded to budge from their seats, while Shonagon, though his high-handed proceedings greatly agitated and alarmed her, had to confess to herself that there was no real reason to interfere, and could only sit moaning in her corner. The little girl was at first terribly frightened. She did not know what he was going to do with her, and shuddered violently. Even the feel of his delicate, cool skin when he drew her to him gave her goose-flesh. He saw this, but none the less, he began gently and carefully to remove her outer garments, and laid her down. Then, though he knew quite well that she was still frightened of him, he began talking to her softly and tenderly. "How would you like to come with me one day, to a place where there are lots of lovely pictures, dolls and toys?" And he went on to speak so feelingly of all the things she was most interested in that soon she felt almost at home with him. But for a long while she was restless, and did not properly go to sleep. The storm still raged. "Whatever should we have done if this gentleman had not been here?" whispered one of the women. "I know that, for my part, I should have been in a terrible fright. If only our little lady were nearer to his age." Shonagon, still mistrustful, sat quite close to Genji all the while. This chapter is going to be the end of me. At last, the wind began to drop. The night was far spent, but his return at such an hour would cause no surprise. "She has become so dear to me," said Genji, "that, above all, at this sad time in her life, I am loath to leave her even for a few short hours. I think I shall put her somewhere where I can see her whenever I wish. I wonder that she is not frightened to live in such a place as this." "I think her father spoke of coming to fetch her," said Shonen, "but that is not likely to be till the 49 days are up." "It would, of course, be under ordinary circumstances, be natural that her father should look after her," admitted Genji. "But, as she has been brought up entirely by someone else, she has no more reason to care for him than for me. And though I have known her so short a time, I am certainly far fonder of her than her father can possibly be." So saying, he stroked the child's hair, and then reluctantly, with many backward glances, left the room. There was now a heavy white fog, and hoarfrost lay thick on the grass. Suddenly he found himself wishing that it were a real love affair. Whoa! And he became very depressed. It occurred to him that on his way home he would pass by a certain house which he had once familiarly frequented. He knocked at the door, but no one answered. He then ordered one of his servants, who had a strong voice, to recite the following lines: "By my sister's gate, though morning fog makes all the world still dark as night, I could not fail to pause." When this had been sung twice, the lady sent an impertinent coxcomb of a valet to the door, who, having recited the poem, "If you disliked the hedge of fog that lies about this place, a gate of crazy wicker would not keep you standing in the street," at once went back again into the house. He waited, but no one else came to the door, and though he was in no mood to go dully home, since it was now broad daylight, what else could be done? At his palace he lay for a long while, smiling to himself with pleasure as he recollected the child's pretty speeches and ways. Towards noon he rose and began to write a letter to her, but he could not find the right words, and after many times laying his brush aside, he determined at last to send her some nice pictures instead. That day, Prince Hyobukyo paid his long-promised visit to the late nun's house. The place seemed to him even more ruinous, vast, and antiquated than he remembered it years ago. How depressing it must be for a handful of persons to live in these decaying halls. And, looking about him, he said to the nurse, "No child ought to live in a place like this, even for a little while. I must take her away at once. There is plenty of room in my house. You," turning to Shonen, "shall be found a place as a lady-in-waiting there. The child will be very well off, for there are several other young people for her to play with." He called the little girl to him, and noticing the rich perfume that clung to her dress since Genji had held her in his arms, the prince said, "How nicely your dress is scented, but isn't it rather drab?" No sooner had he said this than he remembered that she was in mourning, and felt slightly uncomfortable. "I used sometimes to tell her grandmother," he continued, "that she ought to let her come to see me, and get used to our ways, for indeed it was a strange upbringing for her to live alone year in, year out, with one whose health and spirits steadily declined. But she, for some reason, was very unfriendly towards me. And there was in another quarter, too, a reluctance, which I fear, even at such a time as this, may not be wholly overcome." "If that is so," said Shonen, "dull as it is for her here, I do not think she should be moved till she is a little better able to shift for herself." For days on end, the child had been in a terrible state of grief, and, not having eaten the least bite of anything, she was grown very thin. But was none the less lovely for that. He looked at her tenderly and said, "You must not cry any more now. When people die, there is no help for it, and we must bear it bravely. But now all is well, for I have come instead." But it was getting late, and he could not stay any longer. As he turned to go, he saw that the child, by no means consoled at the prospect of falling under his care, was again crying bitterly. The prince, himself shedding a few tears, did his best to comfort her. "Do not grieve so," he said. "Today or tomorrow I will send for you to come and live with me." And with that he departed. Still the child wept, and no way could be found to distract her thoughts. It was not, of course, that she had any anxiety about her own future, for about such matters she had not yet begun to think at all, but only that she had lost the companion from whom, for years on end, she had never for a moment been separated. Young as she was, she suffered so cruelly that all her usual games were quite abandoned. And though sometimes during the day her spirits would a little improve, as night drew on she became so melancholy that Shonagon began to wonder how much longer things would go on like this, and in despair at not being able to comfort her, would herself burst into tears. Alright, so the girl's father, not much better than Genji here, in a very different way, but going in and saying, you know what, sometimes people die, and that it's just on us to chin up and keep going. Asshole, this is a little girl! Yeah. Yay. Presently, Koremitsu arrived with a message saying that Genji had intended to visit them, but, owing to a sudden command from the palace, was unable to do so. And, being very much perturbed at the little one's grievous condition, had sent for further news. Having delivered this message, Koremitsu brought in some of Genji's servants, whom he had sent to mount guard over the house that night. "This kindness is indeed ill-placed," said Shonagon. "It may not seem to him of much consequence that his gentleman should be installed here, but if the child's father hears of it, we servants shall get all the blame for the little lady's being given away to a married gentleman. It was you who let it all begin, we shall be told. Now, be careful," she said, turning to her fellow servants. "Do not let her even mention these watchmen to her father." But alas, the child was quite incapable of understanding such a prohibition, and Shonagon, after pouring out many lamentations to Koremitsu, continued, "I do not doubt that in due time she will somehow become his wife, for so their fate seems to decree. But now, and for a long while, there can be no talk of any such thing, and this, as he has roundly told me, he knows as well as the rest of us. So, what he is after, I cannot for the life of me imagine. Only today, when Prince Hyobukyo was here, he bade me keep a sharp eye upon her, and not let her be treated with any indiscretion. I confess, when he said it, I remembered with vexation certain liberties which I have allowed your masters to take, thinking little enough of them at the time." No sooner had she said this than she began to fear that Koremitsu would put a worse construction on her words than she intended, and shaking her head very dolefully, she relapsed into silence. Nor was she far wrong, for Koremitsu was indeed wondering what sort Genji's misdemeanors could have been. So do we. On hearing Koremitsu's report, Genji's heart was filled with pity for the child's state, and he would like to have gone to her at once, but he feared that ignorant people would misunderstand these frequent visits, and, thinking the girl older than she was, spread foolish scandals abroad. It would be far simpler to fetch her to his palace and keep her there. All through the day he sent numerous letters, and at dusk Koremitsu again went to the house, saying that urgent business had once more prevented Genji from visiting them, for which remissness he tendered his apologies. Shonagon answered curtly that the girl's father had suddenly decided to fetch her away next day, and that they were too busy to receive visits. The servants are all in a fluster at leaving this shabby old house, where they have lived so long, and going to a strange, grand place. She answered his further questions so briefly, and seemed so intent upon her sewing, that Koremitsu went away. Genji was at the great hall, but as usual, he had been unable to get a word out of Aoi in a gloomy mood. He was plucking at his zithern and singing, "Why you sped across field and hill so fast upon this rainy night." The words of the song were aimed at Aoi, and he sang them with much feeling. He was thus employed when Koremitsu arrived at the great hall. Genji sent for him at once and bade him tell his story. Koremitsu's news was very disquieting. Once she was in her father's palace, it would look very odd that Genji should fetch her away, even if she came willingly. It would inevitably be rumored abroad that he had made off with her like a child snatcher, a thief. Far better to anticipate his rival, and, exacting a promise of silence from the people about her, carry her off to his own palace immediately. "I shall go there at daybreak," he said to Koremitsu. "Order the carriage that I came here in. It can be used just as it is, and see to it that 1 or 2 attendants are ready to go with me." Koremitsu bowed and retired. Genji knew that whichever course he chose, there was bound to be a scandal so soon as the thing became known. Inevitably, gossips would spread the report that, young though she was, the child by this time knew well enough why she had been invited to live with Prince Genji in his palace. Let them draw their own conclusions. That did not matter. There was a much worse possibility. What if Hyobukyo found out where she was? His conduct in abducting another man's child would appear in the highest degree outrageous and discreditable. You think? He was sorely puzzled, but he knew that if he let this opportunity slip, he would afterwards bitterly repent it. And, long before daybreak, he started on his way. Aoi was cold and sullen as ever. "I have just remembered something very important, which I must see about at home," he said. "I shall not be away long." And he slipped out so quietly that the servants of the house did not know that he was gone. His cloak was brought to him from his own apartments, and he drove off, attended only by Koremitsu, who followed on horseback. After much knocking, they succeeded in getting the gate opened, but by a servant who was not in the secret. Koremitsu ordered the man to pull in Genji's carriage as quietly as he could, and himself went straight to the front door, which he rattled, coughing as he did so that Shonagon might know who was there. "My lord is waiting," he said, when she came to the door. "But the young lady is fast asleep," said Shonagon. "His Highness has no business to be up and about at this time of night," she said, thinking that he was returning from some nocturnal escapade, and had only called here in passing. "I hear," said Genji, now coming forward, "that the child is to be moved to her father's, and I have something of importance which I must say to her before she goes." "Whatever business you have to transact with her, I am sure she will give the matter her closest attention," scoffed Shonagon. "Matters of importance, indeed, with a child of 10. Genji entered the women's quarters. "You cannot go in there!" cried Shonagon in horror. "Several aged ladies are lying all undressed." "They are all fast asleep," said Genji. "See, I am only rousing the child." And bending over her, "The morning mist is rising," he cried. "It is time to wake." And before Shonagon had time to utter a sound, he had taken the child in his arms, and begun gently to rouse her. Still half dreaming, she thought it was the prince, her father, who had come to fetch her. "Come," said Genji, while he put her hair to rights. "Your father has sent me to bring you back with me to his palace." For a moment, she was dazed to find that it was not her father, and shrank from him in fright. "Never mind whether it is your father or I," he cried. "It is all the same." And so saying, he picked her up in his arms and carried her out of the inner room. Well, cried out Koremitsu and Shogun in astonishment. What would he do next? It seems, said Genji, that you were disquieted at my telling you I could not visit her here as often as I wished, and would make arrangements for her to go to a more convenient place. I hear that you are sending her where it will be even more difficult for me to see her. Therefore, make ready one of the other of you to come with me. Shogun, who now realized that he was going to make off with the child, fell into a terrible fluster. Oh, sir, she said, you could not have chosen a worse time. Today her father is coming to fetch her, and whatever shall I say to him? If only you would wait, I am sure it would all come right in the end. But by acting so hastily, you will do yourself no good, and leave the poor servants here in a sad pickle. If that is all, cried Genji, let them follow as soon as they choose. And to Shogun's despair, he had the carriage brought in. The child stood by, weeping and bewildered. There seemed no way of preventing him from carrying out his purpose, and gathering together the child's clothes that she had been sewing the night before, the nurse put on her own best dress and stepped into the carriage. Genji's house was not far off, and they arrived before daylight. They drew up in front of the western wing, and Genji alighted. Taking the child lightly in his arms, he set her on the ground. Shogun, to whom these strange events seemed like a dream, hesitated, as though still uncertain whether she should enter the house or no. There is no need for you to come in if you do not want to go, said Genji. Now that the child herself is safely here, I am quite content. If you had rather go back, you have only to say so, and I will escort you. Reluctantly, she left the carriage. The suddenness of the move was, in itself, enough to have upset her. But she was also worrying about what Prince Hyobukyo would think when he found that his child had vanished. And indeed, what was going to become of her? One way or another, all her mistresses seemed to be taken from her, and it was only when she became frightened of having wept for so long on end that she at last dried her eyes and began to pray. The western wing had long been uninhabited, and was not entirely furnished. But Koremitsu had soon fitted up screens and curtains where they were required. For Genji, makeshift quarters were soon contrived by letting down the side wings of the screen of honor. He sent to the other part of the house for his night things and went to sleep. The child, who had been put to bed not far off, was still very apprehensive and ill at ease in these new surroundings. Her lips were trembling, but she dared not cry out loud. I want to sleep with Shogun, she said at last in a tearful, babyish voice. You are too big to sleep with a nurse, said Genji, who had heard her. You must try and get to sleep nicely where you are. She felt very lonely, and lay weeping for a long while. The nurse was far too much upset to think of going to bed, and sat up for the rest of the night in the servants' quarters, crying so bitterly that she was unconscious of all that went on around her. But when it grew light, she began to look about her a little. Not only this great palace with its marvelous pillars and carvings, but the sand in the courtyard outside, which seemed to her like a carpet of jewels, made so dazzling an impression upon her that at first she felt somewhat overawed. However, the fact that she was no longer in a household of women gave her an agreeable sense of security. It was the hour at which business brought various strangers to the house. There were several men walking just outside her window, and she heard one of them whisper to another, They say that someone new has come to live here. Who can it be, I wonder? A lady of note, I'll warrant you. Bathwater was brought from the other wing, and steamed rice for breakfast. Genji did not rise till far on into the morning. It is not good for the child to be alone, he said to Shogun. So last night, before I came to you, I arranged for some little people to come and stay here. And so saying, he sent a servant to fetch the little girls from the eastern wing. Nope, not touching that one. Nope. He had given special orders that they were to be as small as possible, and now 4 of the tiniest and prettiest creatures imaginable arrived upon the scene. Murasaki was still asleep, lying wrapped in Genji's own coat. It was with difficulty that he roused her. "You must not be sad any more," he said. "If I were not very fond of you, should I be looking after you like this? Little girls ought to be very gentle and obedient in their ways." And thus her education was begun. Oh, no. She seemed to him, now that he could study her at leisure, even more lovely than he had realized, and they were soon engaged in an affectionate conversation. He sent for delightful pictures and toys to show her, and set to work to amuse her in every way he could. Gradually he persuaded her to get up and look about her. In her shabby dress, made of some dark gray material, she looked so charming now that she was laughing and playing, with all her woes forgotten, that Genji too laughed with pleasure as he watched her. When at last he retired to the eastern wing, she went out of doors to look at the garden. As she picked her way among the trees and along the side of the lake, he gazed with delight upon the frosty flower beds that glittered gay as a picture, while a many-colored throng of unknown people passed constantly in and out of the house. She began to think that this was a very nice place indeed. Then she looked at the wonderful pictures that were painted on all the panels and screens, and quite lost her heart to them. For 2 or 3 days, Genji did not go to the palace, but spent all his time amusing the little girl. Finally, he drew all sorts of pictures for her to put into her copybook, showing them to her one by one as he did. She thought them the loveliest set of pictures she had ever seen. Then he wrote part of the Musashi no poem. She was delighted by the way it was written in bold ink strokes on a background stained with purple. In a smaller hand was the poem, "Though the parent root I cannot see, yet tenderly I love its offshoot, the dewy plant that grows upon Musashi Moor." "Come," said Genji, while she was admiring it, "you must write something too." "I cannot write properly yet," she answered, looking up at him with a witchery so wholly unconscious that Genji laughed. "Even if you cannot write properly, it will never do for us to let you off altogether. Let me give you a lesson." With many timid glances toward him, she began to write. Even the childish manner in which she grasped the brush gave him a thrill of delight, which he was at a loss to explain. "Oh, I have spoiled it," she suddenly cried out, and blushing hid from him what she had written. But he forced her to let him see it, and found the poem, "I do not know what put Musashi into your head, and I am very puzzled. What plant is it that you say is a relative of mine?" It was written in a large childish hand, which was indeed very undeveloped, but was nevertheless full of promise. It showed a strong resemblance to the late nun's writing. He felt certain that if she were given up-to-date copybooks, she would soon write very nicely. Next, they built houses for the dolls, and played so long at this game together that Genji forgot for a while the great anxiety which was at that time preying upon his mind. The servants who had been left behind at Murasaki's house were extremely embarrassed when Prince Shobukyo came to fetch her. Genji had made them promise, for a time at any rate, to tell no one of what had happened, and Shonagon had seemed to agree that this was best. Accordingly, he could get nothing out of them, save that Shonagon had taken the child away with her, without saying anything about where she was going. The prince felt completely baffled. Perhaps the grandmother had instilled into the nurse's mind the idea that things would not go smoothly for the child at his palace. In that case, the nurse, with an excess of craftiness, might, instead of openly saying that she feared the child would not be well treated under his roof, have thought it wiser to make off with her when the opportunity offered. He went home very depressed, asking them to let him know instantly if they had any news. A request which, again, embarrassed them. He also made inquiries of a priest at the temple in the hills, but could learn nothing. She had seemed to him to be a most lovable and delightful child. It was very disappointing to lose sight of her in this manner. The princess, his wife, had long ago got over her dislike of the child's mother, and was indignant at the idea that she was not to be trusted to do her duty by the child properly. Gradually, the servants from Murasaki's house assembled at her new home. The little girls who had been brought to play with her were delighted with their new companion, and they were soon all playing together very happily. When her prince was away or busy or on dreary evenings, she would still sometimes long for her grandmother, the nun, and cry a little. But she never thought about her father, whom she had never been used to see, except at rare intervals. Now, indeed, she had a new father, of whom she was growing every day more fond. When he came back from anywhere, she was the first to meet him, and then wonderful games and conversations began, she sitting all the while in his lap, without the least shyness or restraint. A more charming companion could not have been imagined. It might be that when she grew older she would not always be so trustful. New aspects of her character might come into play. If she suspected, for example, that he cared for someone else, she might resent it. And in such a case, all sorts of unexpected things are apt to happen. But for the present, she was a delightful plaything. Had she really been his daughter, convention would not have allowed him to go on much longer living with her on terms of such complete intimacy. But in a case like this, he felt that such scruples were not applicable. And that brings us to the end of chapter 5. Oh, man, oh man, oh man. That... Yeah, this is... Oh... Yikes. Yikes is about all I can say. Oh... Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. The saving grace in all this is that usually, after the chapter is done, we don't see any more of the focus point woman for a while, at least. So we can try to put this behind us. Yeah, like, yes, it's really hard to tell how much is lost in translation versus how much it actually is icky. Because, like, even Shonogan is like, they're likely going to be married some point. And it's like, ugh. And, you know, this is just straight up kidnapping. Let's not sugarcoat it. He just straight up kidnapped her and is, like, saying, okay, let's start the Stockholm Syndrome. Alright. I need... Yeah, there's a good chance that there is some bias on the front of the translators, or some lack of awareness of cultural significance on the part of the translators. But I don't think this is spun from whole cloth. Like, not to say that, like, where there's smoke, there's fire sort of deal, but there's enough to build a suspicion on. And there's a reason that Genji has this sort of reputation. This is... Yeah. That's not to say that, you know, for the time, it was completely unheard of. It's unusual, obviously. But there was different conventions, different cultures, different times. That's doing a whole lot of heavy lifting, though. I know we always say to look at works through the lens of their context, and like look at authors through the lens of their time, place, and situation. Man, this is straining the rule zero of taking in literature, though. It is a stretch. It is a stretch. But we will continue, obviously, and see whether things improve or get worse. Because you know what? If we got through Thoreau, we can get through this. But you're absolutely right. Sometimes context doesn't make it a whole lot better. Alright, let's go ahead and take a short break. I'm going to go ahead and get a fresh drink, maybe a stiff drink. We'll see how that goes. And stretch the legs. Yes, at least this one is purely fiction. It is a novel. No basis in reality, no basis in of real people, events. Lady Murasaki may have had some influences, but these are all a fiction. Never mind that people write what they know, but this is a fiction. Alright, let's take a quick break. We'll be back in just a little bit, where we will continue with Chapter 6, The Saffron Flower. All right, we are back. Just need to make a quick update because indeed it was time for a stiff drink after all. And I had some convenient vermouth and bitters in the fridge. So we mixed up a quick Manhattan, and that should get us through the second half of tonight's reading. Very good. Measure it by vibes sort of drink. And today's a little bit heavier on the bourbon. All right, so let's go ahead and pick back up where we left off. And that is at the start of chapter 6, the saffron flower. Because certainly, things can't get worse. Right? Right? Alright. Okay. Try as he might, he could not dispel the melancholy into which Yugao's sudden death had cast him. And though many months had gone by, he longed for her passionately as ever. In other quarters, where he looked for affection, coldness vied with coldness and pride with pride. He longed to escape once more from the claims of these passionate and exacting natures, and renew the life of tender intimacy, which, for a while, had given him so great a happiness. But alas, no second Yugao would he ever find. Despite his bitter experience, he still fancied that one day he might at least discover some beautiful girl of humble origin, whom he could meet without concealment. And he listened eagerly to any hint that was likely to put him upon a promising track. If the prospects seemed favorable, he would follow up his inquiries by writing a discreet letter which, as he knew from experience, would seldom indeed meet with a wholly discouraging reply. Even those who seemed bent on showing by the prim stiffness of their answers that they placed virtue high above sensibility, and who at first appeared hardly conversant with the usages of polite society, would suddenly collapse into the wildest intimacy, which would continue until their marriage with some commonplace husband cut short the correspondence. I'm not sure if that's a better or worse start than the last chapter we've had. There were vacant moments when he thought of Utsusemi with regret. And there was her companion, too. Some time or other there would surely be an opportunity of sending her a surprise message. If only he could see her again, as he had seen her that night by sitting by the chessboard in the dim lamplight. It was not indeed in his nature ever to forget anyone of whom he had once been fond. Among his old nurses, there was one called Saemon, to whom, next after Koremitsu's mother, he was most deeply attached. She had a daughter called Taifu no Myobu, who was in service at the palace. This girl was an illegitimate child of a certain member of the imperial family, who was then vice minister of the Board of War. She was a young person of very lively disposition, and Genji often made use of her services. Her mother, Genji's nurse, had afterwards married the governor of Echizen, and had gone with him to his province. So the girl, when she was not at the palace, lived chiefly at her father's. She happened one day, when she was talking to Genji, to mention a certain princess, daughter of the late Prince Hitachi. This lady, she said, was born to the prince when he was quite an old man, and every care had been lavished upon her upbringing. Since his death, she had lived alone and was very unhappy. Genji's sympathy was aroused, and he began to question Myobu about this unfortunate lady. I do not really know much about her character or her appearance, said Myobu. She is extremely seclusive in her habits. Sometimes I have talked to her a little in the evening, but always with a curtain between us. I believe her Zithern is the only companion in whom she is willing to confide. Of the 3 friends, one at least would in her case be unsuitable, said Genji. But I should like to hear her play. Her father was a great performer on this instrument, and it is unlikely that she has not inherited some of his skill. Oh, I am afraid she is not worth your coming to hear, said Myobu. You are very discouraging, he answered. But all the same, I shall hide there one of these nights when the full moon is behind the clouds, and listen to her playing, and you shall come with me. She was not best pleased. But just then, even upon the busy palace, a springtime quiet seemed to have settled, and being quite at leisure, she consented to accompany him. Her father's house was at some distance from the town, and for convenience, he sometimes lodged in Prince Hitachi's palace. Myobu got on badly with her stepmother, and, taking a fancy to the lonely princess's quarters, she kept a room there. It was indeed on the night after the full moon, in just such a veiled light as Genji had spoken of, that they visited the Hitachi palace. I am afraid, said Myobu, that it is not a very good night for listening to music. Sounds do not seem to carry very well. But he would not thus be put off. Really, would you expect him to give up so easily? This is Genji. Go to her room, he said, and persuade her to play a few notes. It would be a pity if I went away without hearing her at all. Myobu felt somewhat shy of leaving him like this in her own little private room. She found the princess sitting by the window, her shutters not yet closed for the night. She was enjoying the scent of a blossoming plum tree, which stood in the garden just outside. It did indeed seem just the right moment. I thought how lovely your Zithern would sound on such a night as this, she said, and could not resist coming to see you. I am always in such a hurry going to and from the palace that, do you know, I have never had time to hear you play. It is such a pity. Music of this sort, she replied, gives no pleasure to those who have not studied it. What do they care for such matters who all day long run hither and thither in the city of 100 towers? She sent for her Zithern, but her heart beat fast. What impression would her playing make upon this girl? Timidly she sounded a few notes. The effect was very agreeable. True, she was not a great performer, but the instrument was a particularly fine one, and Genji found her playing by no means unpleasant to listen to. Living in this lonely and half-ruined palace after such an upbringing, full, no doubt, of antiquated formalities and restrictions, as her father was likely to have given her, it would be strange indeed if her life did not, for the most part, consist of memories and regrets. This was just the sort of place which, in an old tale, would be chosen as the scene for the most romantic happenings. His imagination was stirred. He thought of sending her a message, but perhaps she would think this rather sudden. For some reason he felt shy and hesitated. Genji shy? It seems to be clouding over, said the astute Myobu, who knew that Genji would carry away a far deeper impression if he heard no more for the present. Someone was coming to see me, she continued. I must not keep him waiting. Perhaps some other time when I am not in such a hurry. Let me close your window for you. And with that, she rejoined Genji, giving the princess no encouragement to play any more. "She stopped so soon," he complained, "that it was hardly worth getting her to play at all. One had not time to catch the drift of what she was playing. Really, it was a pity." That the princess was beautiful he made no doubt at all. "I should be very much obliged if you would arrange for me to hear her at closer quarters." But Myobu, thinking that this would lead to disappointment, told him that the princess, who led so hermit-like an existence, and seemed always so depressed and subdued, would hardly welcome the suggestion that she should perform before a stranger. "Of course," said Genji, "a thing of that kind could only be suggested between people who were on familiar terms, or to someone of very different rank. This lady's rank, I am perfectly well aware, entitles her to be treated with every consideration, and I would not ask you to do more than hint at my desire." He had promised to meet someone else that night, and carefully disguising himself, he was preparing to depart when Myobu said, laughing, "It amuses me sometimes to think how the Emperor deplores the too strict and domesticated life which he suffers you to lead. What would he think if he could see you disguising yourself like this?" Genji laughed. "I am afraid," he said as he left the room, "that you are not quite the right person to denounce me. Those who think such conduct reprehensible in a man must find it even less excusable in a girl." She remembered that Genji had often been obliged to reproach her for her reckless flirtations, and, blushing, made no reply. Okay, so they're both rather loose. Still, hoping to catch a glimpse of the zithern player, he crept softly towards her window. He was about to hide at a point where the bamboo fence was somewhat broken down, when he perceived that a man was already ensconced there. Who could it be? No doubt it was one of the princess's lovers, and he stepped back to conceal himself in the darkness. The stranger followed him, and turned out to be no other than To no Chujo. That evening they had left the palace together, but when they parted, Genji, Chujo had noticed, did not either go in the direction of the great hall nor back to his own palace. This aroused Chujo's curiosity, and, despite the fact that he too had a secret appointment that night, he decided first to follow Genji, and discover what was afoot. So, riding upon a strange horse and wearing a hunting cloak, he had got himself up altogether so villainously that he was able to follow Genji without being recognized upon the road. Seeing him enter so unexpected a place, Chujo was trying to imagine what business his friend could possibly have in such a quarter when the music began, and he secreted himself with a vague idea of waylaying Genji when he came out. But the prince, not knowing who the stranger was, and frightened of being recognized, stole on tiptoe into the shadow. Chujo suddenly accosted him. "Though you shook me off so uncivilly, I thought it my duty to keep an eye on you," he said, and recited the poem, "Though together we left the great palace hall, your setting place you would not show me, moon of the 16th night." Thus he remonstrated, and Genji, though at first he had been somewhat put out by finding that he was not alone, when he recognized To no Chujo, could not help being rather amused. "This is indeed an unexpected attention on your part," he said, and expressed his slight annoyance in the answering verse. "Though wheresoever it shines, men marvel at its light. Who has before thought fit to follow the full moon to the hill whereon it sets?" "It is most unsafe for you to go about like this," said Chujo. "I really mean it. You ought always to have a bodyguard. Then you are all right whenever it happens. I wish you would always let me come with you. I am afraid that these clandestine expeditions may one day get you into trouble." And he solemnly repeated the warning. What chiefly worried Genji was the thought that this might not be the first occasion upon which Chujo had followed him. But if it had been his habit to do so, it was certainly very tactful of him never to have questioned Genji about Yugao's child. Though each of them had an appointment elsewhere, they agreed not to part. Both of them got into Genji's carriage, and the moon, having vanished behind a cloud, beguiled the way to the great hall by playing a duet upon their flutes. They did not send for torchbearers to see them in at the gates, but creeping in very quietly, stole to a portico, where they could not be seen, and had their ordinary clothes brought to them there. Having changed, they entered the house merrily, blowing their flutes as though they'd just come back from the palace. That is, Genji is a man of the world. His strike zone is wider than you can imagine. Chujo's father, who usually pretended not to hear them when they returned late at night, on this occasion brought out his flageolet, which was his favorite instrument, and began to play very agreeably. Aoi sent for her zithern, and made all her ladies play on the instruments at which they excelled. Only Nakatsukasa, though she was known for her lute playing, having thrown over Tono Chujo, who had been her lover because of her infatuation for Genji, with whom her sole intercourse was that she sometimes saw him casually when he visited the Great Hall. Only Nakatsukasa sat drooping listlessly. Her passion had become known to Aoi's mother and the rest, and they were being very unpleasant about it. Yes, the mother-in-law would generally frown upon someone who is carrying a torch for the son-in-law. That is a reasonable approach. It doesn't matter what time you're in. She was thinking in her despair that perhaps it would be better if she went and lived in some place where she would never see Genji at all. But the step was hard to take, and she was very unhappy. You're so close to being spot on, lady. You're almost safe. Just do the right thing. You see the red flags. Act. The young princes were thinking of the music they had heard earlier in the evening, of those romantic surroundings tinged with a peculiar and inexplicable beauty. Merely because it pleased him so to imagine her, Tono Chujo had already endowed the occupant of the lonely mansion with every charm. He had quite decided that Genji had been courting her for months, or even years, and thought impatiently that he, for his part, if, like Genji, he were violently in love with a lady of this kind, would have been willing to risk a few reproaches, or even the loss of a little reputation. He could not, however, believe that his friend intended to let the matter rest, as it was, much longer, and determined to amuse himself by a little rivalry. From that time onwards, both of them sent letters to the lady, but neither ever received any answer. This both vexed and puzzled them. What could be the reason? Thinking that such images were suitable to any lady brought up in these rustic surroundings, in most of the poems which they sent her they alluded to delicate trees and flowers, or other aspects of nature, hoping sooner or later to hit on some topic which would arouse her interest in their suit. Though she was of good birth and education, perhaps through... Hang on. YouTube is doing us dirty. I think we're reconnected though. Alright. So first off it is, let's write about flowers. Bitches love flowers. And then, when that doesn't get answered, like, maybe she's just been shut up inside so long she's just dumb. These two. Oh, these two. They're made for each other. The flute duet. Perfect. Alright. And what indeed did it matter whether she answered or not, thought Tono Chujo, who nonetheless was somewhat piqued. With his usual frankness, he said to Genji, "I wonder whether you have had any answer. I must confess that, as an experiment, I too sent a mild hint, but without any success, so I have not repeated it." "So he too has been trying his hand," thought Genji, smiling to himself. "No," he answered aloud, "my letter did not need an answer, which was perhaps the reason that I did not receive one." From this enigmatic reply, Chujo deduced that Genji had been in communication of some kind with the lady, and he was slightly piqued by the fact that she had shown a preference between them. Genji's deeper feelings were in no way involved. And though his vanity was a little wounded, he would not have pursued the matter farther had he not known the persuasive power of Chujo's style, and feared that even now she might overcome her scruples and send him a reply. "You look so disappointed because we have come to the realization that today, and the modern situation of the decline of masculinity and such isn't actually a decline whatsoever. People have always been awful. Always. And the realization is a pall drawn over the eyes. Yes. Men suck. We suck. We've always sucked. Some more than others. These in particular. Where did I... Genji's deeper feelings were in no way involved, and though his vanity was a little wounded, he would not have pursued the matter farther had he not known the persuasive power of Chujo's style, and feared that even now she might overcome her scruples and send him a reply. Chujo would become insufferably cock-a-hoop if he got into his head the idea that the princess had transferred her affections from Genji to himself. He must see what Myobo could be persuaded to do. "I cannot understand," he said to her, "why the princess should refuse to take any notice of my letters. It is really very uncivil of her. I suppose she thinks I am a frivolous person who intends to amuse himself a little in her company and then disappear. You don't..." This little flash of self-awareness, while meant to be said in sarcasm, is the truest shit that Genji has said so far. See. "It is a strangely false conception of my character. As you know, my affections never alter, and if I have ever seemed to the world to be unfaithful, it has always been because in reality my suit had met with some unexpected discouragement. But this lady is so placed that no opposition from parents or brothers can interrupt our friendship, and if she will but trust me, she will find that her being alone in the world, so far from exposing her to callous treatment, makes her the more attractive." "Come," answered Myobu. "It will never do for you to run away with the idea that you can treat this great lady as a pleasant wayside distraction. On the contrary, she is extremely difficult of access, and her rank has accustomed her to be treated with deference and ceremony." So spoke Myobu, in accordance, indeed, with her own experience of the princess. "She has evidently no desire to be thought clever or dashing," said Genji. "For some reason, I imagine her as very gentle and forgiving." He was thinking of Yugao when he said this. Soon after this, he fell sick to his fever, because of course he did, and after that was occupied by a matter of great secrecy, so that spring and summer had both passed away before he could again turn his attention to the lonely lady. But in the autumn came a time of quiet meditation and reflection. Again, the sound of the cloth-beaters' mallets reached his ears, tormenting him with memories and longings. He wrote many letters to the zithern player, but with no more success than before. Her churlishness exasperated him. More than ever, he was determined not to give in, and, sending for Myobu, he scolded her for having been of so little assistance to him. "What can be going on in the princess's mind?" he said. "Such strange behavior I have never met with before." So, remember when we had said that Vic was the most narcissistic person we'd seen in literature so far? I'm glad we clarified that with a "so far." I'm not sure whether Genji has pulled ahead, but he's certainly neck and neck. We always need to make sure that we classify, clarify, and conditionalize all of our statements like that, because the bar will go lower. It always can go lower. It does. It does. Oh, man. I promise, I don't go out of my way to find, like, studies in narcissistic behaviors. I promise I don't. People just tend to write about them, I guess, and become classics. Something about narcissists are interesting. That's probably how we have one in office. Shit, I need more to drink. Alright, back to the book. Let's not get political. If he was piqued and surprised, Myobu, for her part, was vexed that the affair had gone so badly. No one can say that you have done anything so very eccentric or indiscreet, and I do not think she feels so. If she does not answer your letters, it is only a part of her general unwillingness to face the outer world. Such a way of behaving is positively barbarous, said Genji. If she were a girl in her teens and under the care of parents or guardians, such timidity might be pardoned. But in an independent woman, it is inconceivable. I would never have written had I not taken it for granted that she has some experience of the world. I was merely hoping that I had found someone who, in moments of idleness or depression, would respond to me sympathetically. I did not address her in the language of gallantry, but only begged for permission sometimes to converse with her in that strange and lonely dwelling place. But since she seems unable to understand what it is I am asking of her, we must see what can be done without waiting for her permission. If you will help me, you may be sure I shall not disgrace you in some way. Myobu had once been in the habit of describing to him the appearance of people whom she had chanced to meet, and he always listened to such accounts with insatiable interest and curiosity. But for a long while he had paid no attention to her reports. Now, for no reason at all, the mere mention of the princess's existence had aroused in him a fever of excitement and activity. It was all very unaccountable. Probably he would find the poor lady extremely unattractive when he saw her, and she would be doing her a very poor service in effecting the introduction. But to give Genji no help in a matter to which he evidently attached so much importance would seem very ill-natured. Even in Prince Itachi's lifetime, visitors to this stiff, old-fashioned establishment had been very rare, and now no foot at all ever made its way through the thickets, which were closing in around the house. It may be imagined, then, what the visit of so celebrated a person as Genji would have meant to the ladies-in-waiting and lesser persons of the household, and with what urgency they begged their mistress to send a favorable reply. But the same desperate shyness still possessed her, and Genji's letters she would not even read. Hearing this, Myobu determined to submit Genji's request to her at some suitable moment, when she and the princess were carrying on one of their usual uneasy conversations, with the princess's screen of honor planted between them. If she seems displeased, thought Myobu, I will positively have nothing more to do with the matter. But if she receives him and some sort of an affair starts between them, there is fortunately no one connected with her to scold me or get me into trouble. As the result of these and other reflections, being quite at home in matters of this kind, she sensibly decided to say nothing about the business to anybody, not even to her father. Late one night, soon after the 20th day of the 8th month, the princess sat waiting for the moon to rise. Though the starlight shone clear and lovely, the moaning of the wind in the pine tree branches oppressed her with its melancholy, and growing weary of waiting, she was with many tears and sighs recounting to Myobu stories of bygone men and days. Now was the time to convey Genji's message, thought Myobu. She sent for him, and secretly as before, he crept up to the palace. The moon was just rising. He stood where the neglected bamboo hedge grew somewhat sparsely and watched. Persuaded by Myobu, the princess was already at her zithern. So far as he could hear it, at this distance, he did not find the music displeasing, but Myobu, in her anxiety and confusion, thought the tune very dull, and wished it would occur to the princess to play something rather more up-to-date. The place where Genji was waiting was well screened from view, and he had no difficulty in creeping unobserved into the house. Here he called for Myobu, who, pretending that the visit was a complete surprise to her, said to the princess, I am so sorry. Here is Prince Genji come to see me. I am always getting into trouble with him for failing to secure him your favor. I have really done my best, but you do not make it possible for me to give him any encouragement. So now I imagine he has come to deal with the matter for himself. What am I to say to him? I can answer for it that he will do nothing violent or rash. I think that, considering all the trouble he has taken, you might at least tell him that you will speak to him through the screen or curtain. The idea filled the princess with consternation. I should not know what to say to him, she wailed, and as she said the words, bolted towards the far side of the room, with a bashfulness so infantile that Myobu could not help laughing. Indeed, madame, she said, it is childish of you to take the matter to heart in this way. If you were an ordinary young lady under the eye of stern parents and brothers, one could understand it. But for a person in your position to go on forever being afraid to face the world is fantastic. So Myobu admonished her, and the princess, who could never think of any argument against doing what she was told to do, said at last, If I have only to listen, and need not say anything, he may speak to me from behind the lattice door, so long as it is well locked. I cannot ask him to sit on the servant's bench, said Myobu. You really need not be afraid that he will do anything violent or sudden. Thus persuaded, the princess went to a hatch, which communicated between the women's quarters and the stranger's dais, and, firmly locking it with her own hand, stuffed a mattress against it, to make sure that no chink was left unstopped. She was in such a terrible state of confusion that she had not the least idea what she should say to her visitor, if she had to speak to him, and had agreed to listen to him only because Myobu told her that she ought to. Several elderly serving women of the wet nurse type had been lying half asleep in the inner room since dusk. They were, however, one or two younger maids who had heard a great deal about this Prince Genji, and were ready to fall in love with him at a moment's notice. They now brought out their lady's handsomest dress, and persuaded her to let them put her a little to rights. But she displayed no interest in these preparations. Myobu, meanwhile, was thinking how well Genji looked in the picturesque disguise, which she had elaborated for use on these night excursions, and wished it were being employed in some quarter where they were more likely to be appreciated. Her only consolation was that So mild a lady was not likely to make inordinate demands upon him, or pester him with jealousies and exactions. On the other hand, she was rather worried about the princess. What, thought Miyobu, if she should fall in love with him, and her heart be broken merely because I was frightened of getting scolded? Remembering her rank and upbringing, he was far from expecting her to behave with the lively pertness of an up-to-date miss. She would be languorous, yes, languorous and passionate. When half pushed by Miyobu, the princess at last took her stand near the partition, where she was to converse with her visitor. A delicious scent of sandalwood invaded his nostrils, and this piece of coquetry at once raised his hopes. That's kind of interesting. Sandalwood is typically more of a masculine scent in Western, like most colognes and nicer deodorants are sandalwood based, but this has different implications, I suppose. He began to tell her with great earnestness and eloquence how for almost a year she had continually occupied his thoughts, but not a word did she answer. Talking to her was no better than writing. Irritated beyond measure, he recited the verse, "If, with a vow of silence, thus 10 times and again, my combat I renew, 'tis that against me at least no sentence of muteness has been passed. Speak at least one word of dismissal," he continued. "Do not leave me in this bewilderment." There was among her ladies one called Jiju, the daughter of her old nurse. Being a girl of great liveliness and intelligence, she could not bear to see her mistress cutting such a figure as this, and stepping to her side, she answered with the poem. "The bell had sounded, and for a moment silence was imposed upon my lips. To have kept you waiting grieves me, and there let the matter rest." She said the words in such a way that Genji was completely taken in, and thought it was the princess who had thus readily answered his poem. He had not expected such smartness from an aristocratic lady of the old school, but the surprise was agreeable, and he answered, "Madam, you have won the day," adding the verse, "Though well I know that thoughts unspoken count more than thoughts expressed, yet dumb crambo is not a cheering game to play." He went on to speak of one trifle or another as it occurred to him, doing his very best to entertain her, but it was no use. Thinking at last that silence might after all in this strange creature be merely a sign of deep emotion, he could no longer restrain his curiosity, and, easily pushing back the bolted door, entered the room. Miyobu, seeing with consternation that he had falsified all her assurances, thought it better to know nothing of what followed, and without turning her head, rushed away to her own apartments. Jiju and the other ladies in waiting had heard so much about Genji and were so anxious to catch sight of him that they were more than ready to forgive his uncivil intrusion. Their only fear was that their mistress would be at a loss how to deal with so unexpected a situation. He did indeed find her in the last extremity of bashfulness and embarrassment, but under the circumstances that, thought Genji, was natural. Much was to be explained by the strict seclusion in which she had been brought up. He must be patient with her. As his eyes grew used to the dim light, he began to see that she was not at all beautiful. Had she then not one quality at all to justify all these hopes and schemes? Apparently not one. It was late. What was the use of staying? Damn, Genji! Calm down, brother. Bitterly disappointed, he left the house. Miyobu, intensely curious to know what would happen, had lain awake, listening. She wanted, however, to keep up the pretense that she had not witnessed Genji's intrusion, and, though she plainly heard him leaving the house, she did not go to see him off or utter a sound of any kind. Stealing away as quietly as possible, he returned to the Nijo Inn and lay down upon his bed. This time, at least, he thought he was on the right path. What a disillusionment! And the worst of it was that she was a princess, a great lady. What a mess he was in! So he lay thinking, when Tô no Chiûjiô entered the room. "How late you are!" he cried. "I can easily guess the reason." Genji rose. "I was so comfortable sleeping there, all alone, that I overslept myself," he said. "Have you come here from the palace?" "Yes," said Chiûjiô. "I was on my way home. I heard yesterday that today they are choosing the dancers and musicians for the celebrations of the Emperor's visit to Suzaku-in, and I am going home to tell my father of this. I will look in here on my way back." Seeing that Chiûjiô was in a hurry, Genji said that he would go with him to the great hall. He sent at once for his breakfast, bidding them also to serve the guest. 2 carriages were drawn up and waiting for them, but they both got into the same one. "You still seem very sleepy," said Chiûjiô in an aggrieved tone. "I am sure you have been doing something interesting that you do not want to tell me about." Alright, and at that point, we are shifting to the busyness of the day. The excitement of the evening is past, and it seems like a good place to have our break for the evening. We're about halfway through this chapter. We just continually have very awkward breaks as we finish up for the nights on this book, but that's to be understood. It's just not every book will bend itself to our convenience. I understand. I will do my best to cope and live with this fact. I will silently grieve, though. But, so, Genji is really... At this point, I find it hard to believe that we were sympathizing with him early on, when he was listening to his friends being extra Tate Bro level, and being dismissive of them. That was like the high watermark. He was a child. He peaked as a pubescent boy. Because it has been nothing but downhill in various different ways since then. We had the very icky last chapter, which might be justified and might be explained away as innocent enough. But if you have to explain it away, you're in a situation you shouldn't be anyway. Just saying. Just saying. Yeah. And then now, as soon as he sees the princess, as soon as he sees her, the shy little flower, who has not bloomed at all, has just didn't want anything to do with him, just wanted to be left alone. As soon as he actually sees her, he's like, "Oh, she's not pretty. Bye." What the hell, Genji? What the hell? I feel like we're being inordinately targeting to your social group, or not social group, your high school acquaintances. I'll admit that I have rather intentionally not maintained contact with many or most or any of the old high school crowd, so I am certainly not one to judge. Worse as we go on. We must remember, the Tale of Genji is a multi-volume story. It's basically like a series of novels, less than a single novel. And each of the chapters they're interconnected enough that it's not quite fair to call them like short stories or novellas of their own. They are all together in one. But the volumes are a decent point where they kind of... Okay, why was that censored? Like, the context, sure, it's kind of sus, but the words themselves aren't catching it. So unless, like, Gemini's in here reading the chat and be like, you know what, nope, that's insulting. We can't have that. That seems entirely benign of a chat to me. Why would it be censored? Google's got it out for you, buddy. Anyway, as I was saying, Genji is split into volumes. So we've got a lot more, actually. So we're a little bit more than halfway. We're at about the 60% mark of volume 1 here. There are 4 volumes in this translation. 4! And we're already, like, in the trenches with it. Like, we're digging down as far as we can go to get that bar just a little bit lower. I am terrified to think of the direction that this can continue to go. Because, you must remember, this is basically Imperial Court Japan soap opera. And just like the days of our lives, things aren't generally just happy-go-lucky. So, this is going to continue to be, perhaps, a crime against sensibility. And I guess we're here for it. That's not to say it's not fun to read. It's interesting to see the... You can't look away from a train wreck. Yeah, and you're right. It's absolutely shocking that a lady in waiting would write about royals like this, because it's like, yeah, I mean, you write what you know, right? Or you have the ideas. Woo, it's entertaining. But yeah, so we'll continue to see where this goes. It is a train wreck that it is hard to look away from, and things continue to get bad in different ways. Genji is basically the classical Japanese Fabio. Pretty and the object of desire all across, and absolutely full of himself. Yes, ancient Japanese Jersey Shore is a good way to put it. So, let's just leave off from here. Let it simmer for a little bit. Take the next couple of days to find something that's got a little bit of a kick to it, because we're going to need it for this weekend, I think. So, we will be back on Friday night, when we will continue Volume 1 of Genji Monogatari from about halfway through Chapter 6. At this pace, I think we'll probably finish it this weekend, maybe Tuesday, just depending on how things shake out. So we're on pace to have an eventful and productive November. We still have plans for Oz. I'm just trying to decide where it should fit in. Ooh, Horchata sounds great. Ooh. But yeah, we'll see where things land as far as like when and what we move on to new projects. Oz is going to be kind of a short read, probably 1 or 2 sessions, honestly. So I'd like it to be toward the end of November, if we can, but also we're getting into that awkward point where if we pick up another project after Genji, it very easily could run long. So maybe we'll wrap up some other short stories, or get the second Alice in Wonderland or something. Yes, long series but short books. Yeah, so because there are a very large number of Oz books. The most famous, obviously, is the Wonderful Wizard of Oz, but there are many, 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 and actually the traditional, or the classic movie and adaptation is a mishmash of many of them compiled and jumbled into one. Yeah, there's not really any good adaptation, which isn't necessarily bad. This is the sort of thing that a very old story like that is ripe for reinterpretation. Otherwise, like, we wouldn't have Wicked, we wouldn't have the Wizard of Oz as it is. It's a classic for a reason. Classic movie, classic book. If anything, the old movie is more well known than the book ever was. Yeah, that's true. It can be a good movie, but a bad adaptation, and that's a good way to approach Oz. It is good in and of itself. It's not true to the source material, but it is good. It sort of tips its hat to the source material. Anyway, and we're wandering already. So, let's go ahead and call this a stopping point for tonight. We'll figure out our plans as we go. And we will just kind of let it ride. It's November. I don't want to stress it. October was so busy with all of our projects and plans that I'd rather not overthink this. We're just gonna let it ride and be thankful for the chill. Speaking of chill, it has been a long time since I had snow in November. I was not prepared. I was not prepared. On the bright side, keeping it in the 60s in the house, cats are extra cozy. Yes, next season we have big plans, and one of those plans is gonna be a doozy. I mean, we have to read. We have to pull out Dickens, and that's a commitment. It really is. That may actually, if we read, because I think Dickens' Christmas Carol is probably, it will probably contend with our longest series. So, December may be pretty well booked. Brace yourself. Alright, let's go ahead and wrap up here. I'm meandering, and I unfortunately do have things to do tonight. So, we will be back on Friday to continue our reading of Genji Monogatari, and we'll see what other antics and misadventures Hikaru can get himself up to. Alright, until then, I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. If you haven't, I do request you go ahead and drop a like on the stream, maybe drop a subscription in, let the algorithm know that we're doing some fun things around here, and until we return, have a wonderful night, and thank you. Bye now.